What's the best way of categorizing the Romance languages? Well, they all descend from Latin. We are talking about a continuum of speech that stretches across broad swaths of Southern Europe. And it's not even limited just to Europe. For example, African Romance, which existed in late antiquity and is no longer spoken, is criminally understudied. And even within the relatively small confines of Southern Europe, there are enormous differences between languages geographically as close as Romanian and the dialects of northern Italy. Well, it turns out that a very handy way of distinguishing between the Romance languages is how they say the number 8. One of the ways that the Romance languages are often categorized is according to mutual intelligibility and genealogy. So, for example, it's because of that that we see this categorization up on screen now, with Ibero-Romance, Occitano-Romance, Gallo-Romance, the smaller cluster of Rhaeto-Romance. Gallo-Italic is also another branch. Italo-Dalmatian is there too. There's Vlach, which includes Romanian, and you'll notice that almost as its own branch we have Sardinian. More on that later. Now, as you can see, unfortunately, we've had to leave out African Romance. This is partially due to a lack of attestation and also because scholars still today are debating which branch it might fit into, and there are many scholars who argue that actually it should belong to its own branch. If you're interested in digging a little bit deeper into this topic, Native Lang has made a very good video on African Romance a while back, so you can check that one out. As useful as that branch division we've looked at just now is, there's a much broader, intriguing division between the Romance languages, and that is between what the linguist Walther von Wartburg called Western and Eastern Romania, or Romania. And of course, I don't need to perhaps clarify here that when we talk about Romania, even though it's spelled the same way, we are not talking about Romania, the country. In his work published in French as La fragmentation linguistique de la Romanie, von Wartburg drew this distinction between Western Romania, Western Romance languages, and Eastern Romance languages based on shared phonological features. And these were differences that reflected the conditions of Romanization. A good example of this would be the fact that not all areas that came onto the Roman Empire were conquered at the same time. They were conquered at different times, and factors such as chronology, but even geography, played a remarkably determinative role. For example, the fact that in the earlier branch classification of Romance languages, Sardinian has its own place isn't simply due to the fact that the island of Sardinia was incorporated into the Roman Empire relatively early. The fact that it's an island itself is almost as important in how phonetically conservative that language has been. Among the range of phonetic differences between Eastern and Western Romance is how those languages pronounce the word 8, coming from Latin octō. You see, in von Wartburg's distinction, all of the languages classified as Western Romance palatalize that velar consonant k before the t. This is why we get Spanish ocho, Portuguese oito, Catalan huit, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and French huit. By contrast, the Eastern Romance languages in von Wartburg's distinction do not palatalize the velar consonant k. They might go the path of gemination in Italian otto. They might substitute for another consonant, like in Romanian opt. I do hope I've pronounced that correctly. Sardinian, like Italian, if I'm not mistaken, also says otto. Von Wartburg argued that the reason behind these differences is found in substrate influence. All of the languages that he qualifies as Western Romance have very strong Celtic substrates, whereas all of the languages of Eastern Romance lack that Celtic substrate influence. And it seems as though it's this Celtic substrate influence that provokes the palatalization of the velar consonant k in the Western languages. I'm going to leave up a chart as I'm speaking now so that you can do a quick comparison between the Western and Eastern forms here. But as you are looking at it, note something interesting. On this channel, due to personal familiarity, I try to limit myself to speaking about Spanish, Italian, French, and when I can, Portuguese. And I'll often say that these are Western Romance languages, but I'm not really applying a very rigid, careful linguistic distinction there. It's more of a generic geographical distinction, distinguishing between West and East, as we tend to do when looking at the map in Europe in general. In fact, there's a very good motive for qualifying modern Standard Italian as an Eastern Romance language. Do you have any other insightful means of categorizing Romance? I'd like to hear from you in the comments below again, and I'll see you in the next video.